Imagine being a mother. Your son is on the brink of death. You have no money, no resources, no time. Your only hope lies across the border, and you cross it out of love, out of desperation. But when you finally find help, the government knocks on your door, and the pain of saving your son turns into the fear of losing him forever. This is Maria's story. Maria never thought she would cross a border illegally. She never imagined abandoning her land, her family, her roots. But when Mateo's health began to deteriorate, all her certainties crumbled. At first it was just a fever, the kind that any child gets. But the days passed and the fever did not subside. Joint pain, extreme fatigue, sunken eyes and yellow skin appeared. They took him to the village health center, then to the neighboring town. The doctors tried, but they had no resources. One of them, more sincere than the others, was blunt. He needs specialized treatment, and fast, and that treatment does not exist here. The words hit her like a sentence. Maria looked at her son and saw something no mother ever wants to see, the fear of dying in a child's eyes. At that moment, she made the hardest decision of her life. She sold the food cart she used for work, the few pieces of jewelry she had, inherited from her grandmother, and even the old TV in the living room. She borrowed money from friends, asked neighbors for help, and prayed that it would be enough. She boarded a clandestine bus with Mateo and headed for the US border. Crossing wasn't easy. They walked for 3 days in the desert, sleepless nights, scorching heat during the day and bitter cold at night. Mateo could barely walk, so Maria carried him in her arms, sometimes on her back. With every step, she repeated to herself, "For my son, for my son." When they finally arrived in Texas, Maria went straight to a children's hospital. She spoke little English, but with the help of another immigrant, she managed to explain what was happening. The doctors treated Mateo immediately. The tests confirmed it, a serious and rare autoimmune disease. The treatment would be long, but there was hope. For the first time in weeks, Maria could breathe. She sat by her son's bedside, holding his hand as he slept under the effects of the medication. It was as if time had stopped. All she wanted was to see that boy smiling again, running through the streets like before. The following days were a mixture of relief and worry. Mateo was responding well to treatment, but Maria knew that her presence there was illegal. So she didn't think about herself. She thought about her son. She slept in a chair next to his bed, her heart torn between gratitude and fear. She hardly left the hospital, afraid of being seen, noticed, questioned, until one morning, while feeding Mateo spoonfuls of soup, she noticed 2 uniformed men approaching the door of the room. They had badges with the acronym she feared most, ICE, the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement. A chill ran down her spine. She looked at her son, who was still smiling, unaware. But Maria knew time was up. The 2 ICE agents stopped at the bedroom door. Maria tried to remain calm, but her heart was beating like a drum inside her chest. They called her name in a low but firm voice. "Maria Gonzalez?" She hesitated. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to disappear. But she was standing next to Mateo, who was now looking at her curiously, not understanding what was about to happen. She nodded slowly. One of the agents entered the room and showed her a sheet of paper with arrest warrants. The other stood in the background, watching her every move. "We need you to come with us," said the man without emotion. Maria tried to argue, her voice breaking. "My son is sick. He's undergoing treatment." But her words were lost, her Spanish mixed with poorly learned English, muffled by fear. The agent simply repeated more firmly, "Now." Mateo stirred. In his bed, he saw when the men put handcuffs on his mother. Yes, handcuffs, inside the hospital, in front of doctors, nurses, other patients, and in front of him. "Mamá, ¿qué pasa?" he asked. Maria didn't answer. She tried to smile even though her eyes were filled with tears. "It's okay, my love. Everything will be fine. I'll be right back." But despair was written all over both their faces. Matteo screamed, he cried. He stretched out his arms, wanting to touch her, to hold her. A nurse rushed to comfort him as he cried uncontrollably. Outside the room, nurses and doctors looked on in shock. Many protested to the officers, saying it was inhumane to arrest a mother in front of her hospitalized son. That there were legal means that this was an exception, but the officers simply replied that they were following orders, and they did. Maria was taken away in silence, handcuffed like a criminal, while Matteo's voice echoed through the corridors. "Mommy, Mommy, don't go!" At the detention center, Maria was placed in a cold cell with other women in the same situation. She barely ate or slept. Every second away from her son was torture. She thought about how he was doing, whether he was responding to treatment, whether he was eating, whether he was sleeping, whether he was crying. She felt guilty for putting him in that situation. She was afraid she would never see him again. Meanwhile, the story spread. A nurse who witnessed the scene told everything to the local press. The case sparked outrage. Human rights groups began to mobilize. An organization of volunteer lawyers heard about the story and filed an urgent request for release on humanitarian grounds. Social media exploded. "Free Maria" became a rallying cry. Public opinion was mounting. Matteo, even though he was ill, appeared in a photo released by the NGO, holding a drawing with the phrase, "Quiero a mi mamá." I want my mum. It was impossible not to be moved. After weeks of detention and popular mobilization, a judge granted Maria provisional release. She was released with an electronic ankle bracelet under immigration custody, but authorized to accompany her son's treatment. Upon leaving the detention center, she went straight to the hospital. She ran into the room and saw Matteo sleeping. When he heard her, he opened his eyes. He smiled, and he said, in a weak voice, "I knew you would come back, Mama." They hugged for a long time, as if clinging to life itself, as if they had survived an invisible war, not one of bullets, but of bureaucracy, fear, and borders. In the days following Maria's release, the hospital became more than a place of treatment. It became a refuge of hope. Matteo continued to fight bravely against his illness, but now with his mother by his side. Her presence seemed like an invisible but powerful medicine. The doctors noticed a faster improvement, and there was no doubt the bond between mother and son was stronger than any diagnosis. Maria, even with an electronic ankle bracelet on her foot, made a point of smiling at her son every day. She told him stories, sang old songs from Mexico, drew with him, as if trying to give back to that stolen childhood a little color and lightness. And in the silence of the early morning when Matteo was asleep, she cried. She cried with relief, fear, exhaustion. But she also cried for all the other mothers who were still in prison, for those who had not been as lucky, for those whose children were waiting or no longer knew how to wait. Maria's story crossed borders. It made the front pages of newspapers and was the subject of television reports and debates. Celebrities shared the case and donated funds to the cause. Immigrant support organizations grew stronger, using Maria's example as a symbol of resistance, courage, and humanity. Her case raised a question that echoed throughout the country. What makes us truly human? For Maria, the answer has always been clear: a mother's love. A love that walks for days in the desert, that faces fear, that challenges systems, that doesn't ask permission to protect those it loves. Over time, lawyers were able to secure Maria's right to remain in the United States while Matteo's treatment continued. And then, no one knew. The future was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, she was able to live one day at a time. She even got a volunteer job at the hospital, helping other immigrant mothers communicate with doctors, translating, comforting, guiding, because she knew firsthand what it was like to be on the other side. Matteo gradually got better. He started walking down the hallways again. He smiled more often. He drew pictures of his mother as a superheroine, with a cape, a shield, and wings. "You're my guardian," he would say. And she, holding his little hands, would smile with tears in her eyes. And perhaps that is what is most moving about this story. It's not just about a woman who crossed the border for love, nor is it just about a child who faced illness with courage. It's about how, even in the darkest moments, compassion can light a flame, about how injustice can be faced with dignity, and about how a mother, even in chains, never ceases to be free when she fights for her child. As the world turns, millions of Marias continue walking, in silence, in fear, but with faith. And perhaps, when we hear stories like this, we begin to understand that behind every number, every statistic, there is a heart, a story, a life worth telling, because when humanity seems to have forgotten the value of a mother's embrace, it's time to remember.